Alrighty, we'll go ahead and get started. Um, so I have half of the exam graded. So just the multiple choice and short answer section was graded. I still have to do the essays. Little inside baseball here. We are in the process of creating an applied master's in psychology that'll be entirely online and supposed to launch next fall. And that ate up my entire day yesterday, and I still didn't get as much done as I wanted to. The fun of being department chair. So we are deep in that, and it meant that I just did not get to grading. I hate being more than a week over, so I will try to be as efficient as I can for y'all. So people typically do better on the essay portion, and remember, sort of mentally, you can add those two together to get your grade. I think probably the most common issue on the in-class test, not really in-class, the multiple choice part and short answer was some people just missed the short answers, or I guess just decided not to do them. So that took 20 points off right there. And a 50-point test, that's going to bring you down pretty quickly, right? And then some people were writing too short for those. Those are 5-point answers. So if you're only writing a sentence, it's probably not enough. You're not articulating stuff. This is the class where typically people do struggle on the first test, but then the second and the third go much better. This is also a class where the exams are a fairly small portion of your total grade. I want to not lie to you, so I'm going to double check your total points. Yeah, your total points are 700. So the exams are less than half of your grade. So kind of keep that in mind. All these in-person assignments we're doing, you get 10 points just for participating in them. And then a lot of points will come for the simulation at the end of the semester as well. I say that just because I know in a couple weeks midterm reports will come up and we won't have taken another test, right? And we only have so many class assignments. And so some people freak out. And I want to try to assure you. However, if you've been seeing a lot of the in-class assignments and things like that, it might be worth talking to me about your grade going forward. So today we're going to start talking about the folks who came after Freud. We'll do 2 days of lecture about this, and then we actually have 2 days of discussion next week about this as well. Because there's a lot, not only we're going to talk about the folks who came right after Freud, some of them actually sort of studied with him and interacted with him, but then there's still modern fallout from everything Freudian. Right? And ideas about psychodynamics. So we're going to talk about that next week as well. So I'm just going to adjust our captions here and we will dive on in. I've also, in this lecture, if you're following along on the Google Slides online, you'll see I've inserted a lot of videos. So we're going to watch a lot of videos. And as much as I could, I tried to get videos of the person themselves talking, so they're going to be old and black and white and crackly, but I think it's so important to see what these people look like, to hear them in their own words, right? And to recognize that these were people who, 100 years ago feels like a long time ago, but in some cases, some of the folks we're going to start talking about, particularly the next group we do on humanistic ideas, didn't die until the 90s or the 2000s, right? So they were around fairly recently. So we've mentioned Anna Freud already. She was Freud's daughter. She was alive from 1985 to 1982. And she was the only member of Freud's family to follow in his footsteps. He had several other children as well. No one was interested. It's sometimes you're I don't want to do what mom and dad do, right? I think they kind of had that vibe, particularly when your dad is so popular and famous. You might have that reaction. As I mentioned previously, because there was no one else all around to do it, Anna Freud had to be psychoanalyzed by her dad because at that time, and I think for a lot of psychoanalysts now, still a big part of the training to be a psychoanalyst is to be psychoanalyzed yourself so that you can resolve your issues and really be that blank slate for your clients. She really became the guardian of his, I want to say empire. It was really an empire, but his sort of estate, maybe is more accurate, and his intellectual heir. Now, I don't know that Freud ever acknowledged this. Freud was always looking for a male intellectual heir, and we'll talk about several of them. But Anna was the one who stuck the most closely to her father's theories and really carried on his legacy. She's the one that designated that the house in London needed to become a museum after his death. So she really was about carrying on his legacy. She really focused a lot on kids. So Anna was really interested in the psychology of kids. And then also talking more about the ego than the id. Freud focused mostly on adults and talked a lot about the id. And Anna was really interested in the ego. She was really interested in kids who had experiences that were beyond war, beyond normal. Again, she was growing up in an era where they had World War I, and then she saw World War II, right? She saw how this affected kiddos. So like a lot of times we're pretty fortunate here in the US where war feels really abstract if we ourselves or our loved ones are not directly in combat, right? But like London during both of those wars was bombed, right? And so kids actually like witnessed this. And also, again, she was in Vienna, in Austria. They also saw a lot of direct combat. She was 19 years old at the start of World War I. So again, think of someone sort of around y'all's age and what a profound effect that might have on her thinking and the way she wanted to help people. Her main contribution was taking Freud's theory and applying it directly to kids. She was a huge child advocate. She really believed that psychoanalysis and psychiatry in general could be helpful to children, right, and could help their well-being. She brought psychoanalysis into pediatrics, into childcare, into education, and also into family law. So Anna was sort of the first like clinical forensic, she was a psychiatrist, but psychologist-esque, right? She was thinking about things like custody and the effects of domestic violence on children. Her observations of children extended beyond normal or disturbed children growing up in average homes and included children who had met with extraordinary circumstances. So not only war, but maybe orphans or children who had physical disabilities. Remember, before this time, therapy was something, and even for her father, therapy was something only the wealthy or really like upper middle class folks could afford. There was no insurance, you were paying out of pocket, and true psychoanalysis, you were going like 3 to 5 days a week. So this was a very, very expensive, and Anna made it more approachable. So her observations gave people some new insights. So before Anna, it was believed that children generally had a horror of combat, blood, and destruction. Thus, war had a devastating effect on children. And yeah, that can happen. But Anna really noticed that although the war was upsetting to the children, their world really pivoted around their home. And in particular, because she was a psychoanalyst, she looked at mothers, right? And that if the family and the mom in particular were sort of able to provide stability and support, kids generally got through even like war okay. So here is a brief video of Anna, or about Anna.
Anna Freud was the daughter of the founder of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, She was born in Vienna in 1895, when her father's radical theories of sex and the mind were starting to make him famous across Europe. She became a schoolteacher and then a psychoanalyst, and pioneered the treatment of children, establishing clinics and nurseries for children who were war victims, survivors of the Holocaust, or just generally troubled by their lives. Perhaps most importantly for us, she is our finest guide to what we call defense mechanisms, which she described best in her 1936 book, The Ego and the Mechanisms of Defense. The book laid out for the first time the core idea that we instinctively try to protect our ego, our acceptable picture of who we are, with a variety of defenses. The problem is that in the act of defending ourselves against pain in the immediate term, we harm our longer-term chances of dealing with reality, and therefore of developing and maturing as a result. Anna Freud highlighted 10 key types of defense mechanisms. Firstly, denial. Denial is when we don't admit there is a problem. We think things like, I enjoy drinking very much and I sometimes get quite bad hangovers, but
We've gone over the defense mechanism, so I'm not going to go into this too much. If I recall, there's a nice little summary about her at the end here.
Observes how many difficulties they bring in their wake. They hold back our careers, they're boring for others, and they hurt those who love us. Freud argued that most of us employ at least 5 of her defense mechanisms every day without being in any way aware of it. She wrote her great book as a way of helping us to see a little better what we're constantly doing, in the hope that we can in future be a little more mature and a little less, as we still say in unknowing tribute to her, defensive towards those around us.
So again, a lot of the language we use currently comes from some of these ideas. So Freud came up with the defense mechanism. Sigmund Freud, her dad, came up with the defense mechanisms, but Anna Freud was the one who really wrote them all down, categorized them, really did careful writing about them for the first time. Again, remember, her dad was more interested in the id. Anna was more interested in the ego. So one of the interesting things that she did was to come up with what she called a diagnostic profile, which was a psychoanalytic framework used to organize and integrate the information that you get during a diagnostic assessment. It's a complete view of their personality functioning, and this is essentially what an intake report is today, but it's not something that had been conceptualized before her. So it would include things like the reason they came in for therapy, the description of the person. So in Anna's case, again, description of the child. So their moods, their mannerisms, their appearance. Are they clean, well dressed? Are they disheveled? Family background, personal history. So their life story, their family constellation, possibly significant environmental influences. She would assess development. So development and expression of libido and aggression, development of the ego and the superego. She would look at signs for regression and or fixation, which interestingly she called a genetic assessment, not the way we would use that term today. And so she'd look at dynamic and structural things. She also came up with this idea of the developmental line, which is a series of id-ego interactions characterized by a shift from the external world controlling you to an increase in self-control and what she called ego mastery. And so the idea was, you start as a baby, right? When you're a baby, you just simply can't control the world around you, right? You're sort of dependent on everyone else around you. But then as you grow and you get to y'all's age, you have more of an ability to influence the environment, to feel like you actually know what you're doing, right? The lines were very psychoanalytic, not very surprisingly. So for example, one of them went from wetting and soiling to bladder and bowel control, focusing on that anal stage. But these were environmental and interpersonal situations, and they complemented her father's discussion of psychosexual development. So she said, as children grow up, they progress from dependency to emotional self-reliance, sucking to what she called rational eating. I mentioned this one, bedwetting and soiling, to bladder and bowel control, irresponsibility to responsibility in body management. We're thinking the latent period, play to work, and then egocentricity to companionship, thinking about that adolescent or genital phase. And again, she focused way more on the ego. So to understand the unconscious drives of the id, it's essential to make the ego aware of the defense mechanisms that it is employing. She systematized and elaborated on Freud's discussion of these ego defenses. Again, Sigmund Freud, her father, whereas Sigmund concentrated on exploring the unconscious drives of the id, Anna realized that in order for these to emerge in analysis, the ego must be aware of the defenses that it's using to prevent that material from coming into consciousness. Again, remember, we've got that sensor, we've got the ego trying to keep stuff out of conscious awareness. And she said that the ego defenses could be inferred from observable behavior. This is like proto-behaviorism, which is really interesting because a lot of people think of behaviorism as a huge, like, totally different thing to psychoanalysis. Analysis of the defenses permits one to understand the child's life history and also their development. Anna Freud also elaborated on the ego defenses and suggested some additional new ones. So, for example, one of hers that she developed is identification with the aggressor. And so this is where the victim responds to their captor or aggressor with gratitude and admiration. She was initially conceptualizing this, thinking of prisoners of war and hostages. This is what has sometimes been termed Stockholm syndrome. But you could certainly see this in abusive relationships as well, right? And this picture down in the corner is Anna and her father, and I believe that's outside of the London home where he spent the last years of his life. Just a sec, I'm gonna make sure I've got everybody who is on Zoom checked in here. All right, so that's, again, like nutshell version of Anna Freud. We will be talking about each of these people fairly briefly, but trying to hit sort of like the high points of their career here. So Alfred Adler was around from 1870 to 1937. He was a physician. He was actually trained as an ophthalmologist. And if I recall, part of how he got interested in more psychoanalysis is, he was sort of interested in the neurons in the eye. In 1902, Adler joined Freud's inner circle. He was fascinated by Freud. He had read his work before meeting Freud. And so he was very excited to meet him and have discussions with him. He was one of the individuals that Freud thought, this is going to be my intellectual heir, my intellectual successor. But Adler had other ideas. He was, instead of being interested in the id or even the ego, Adler was interested in the study of power and how power affects our psyche. So one of the things that Adler conceptualized was this idea of striving for superiority. He argued that all things, all people are trying to develop a sense of mastery and understanding. So all individuals are motivated to try to get equality with or superiority over other people. And he thought this was just innate. Everyone was doing this. again, I don't know as much about Adler's childhood, but I'm guessing there's something about power there, right? Um, there's this idea that Adler had called organ inferiority. Adler believed we were all born inferior. So he said that people try to compensate for this feeling of inferiority with the striving for superiority. And typically people will focus in on whatever they felt was their weakest part when they were a kid. So their weakest part in childhood. Adler said, we're born helpless into social and physical situations we did not ask to be born into. And so everyone felt inferior as a child. And so the term inferiority complex actually comes from Adler's work. It's really interesting, again, sort of like thinking about these. Adler really is a proto-humanist slash existentialist, which we'll talk about after next week. So humanists really have this idea that people are always trying to better themselves, not because they feel inferior, but that like people just want to be better. And the idea of being born in a place that you can't control is really related to an idea in existential psychology called thrownness, which is like you're thrown into the world. It's the time and space you're born into, and you can't change that. So again, you can see how these folks influenced each other. He also was interested in this idea of masculine protest. This is overcompensation. The desire of an adult to act and become powerful because of these feelings of inadequacy or inferiority. Similar to his mentor, Freud, he applied this term universally regardless of gender or sex. So he applied this to women as well as men. He also talked about holistic creativity. So the idea that people are creative and they are responsible individuals who create themselves into the future. And they do this according to what he called fictional goals. These are beliefs they are consciously invested in. People have goals, people have ideas, people have things they strive for. And he saw this as a good thing. Again, thinking about people being sort of proto or before some of the theories we'll talk about later in the semester. This idea about thinking about cognition and the psychology of as if in therapy in particular is something we'll see when we talk about learning and cognitive theories. So he said that the beliefs people form to help them understand, protect, and control their experiences can be beneficial, right? Or can be harmful. He said, kind of related to holistic creativity, what matters is what you believe in, not what anyone else believes in, not what anyone else believes about you. And so he would tell people to act as if other people were not judging them, as if they did not have barriers in the way. And this is something that's used quite a bit in modern therapy for depression. So one of the biggest things that happens when people have depression is they will not want to do anything. Like depression just makes you feel like you want to stay in bed all day sometimes. And so one of the things we do in modern therapy is to tell clients to act as if they were not depressed. What would you do if you were not depressed? Why don't you go out and act as if you were not depressed? Try going and doing something you usually enjoy, see what happens. We have people do this till they start to believe it. This is also sometimes referred to as fake it till you make it. And I believe I do have film actually of Adler talking.
The socially mistaken pattern is built up in the first 4 or 5 years. Mostly we find as reasons for it imperfect organs, or that the child had been pampered, or that we find hated children is among orphans, sometimes illegitimate children, ugly children, not wanted children, and so on. This pattern is fixed and can be changed only if we are able to convince this child about the mistakes, or later in life. Therefore, we could eliminate the mistakes in this pattern, either in prevention, to educate the family how to educate children rightly, or we could make the school an instrument of the social progress, to recognize the mistakes in their beginning and to accomplish more social interest among the pupils. Later in life it is more difficult, and it must be an individual treatment, how to convince such a person and how to change him. In this way, we are sure that the key of the individual psychology is the most important and worthwhile key, and we can guess much better, as with other methods, what is the mistake made in the childhood and how to correct it. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I come to the following conclusion. I discovered 20 years ago the inferiority complex, which had been proved to be a very worthwhile key for understanding human nature and personalities. As I have explained, an individual is a unity from beginning of life, and his style of life cannot be changed without understanding the mistakes made in the roots. And these roots are lying in the family life, in which each individual is formed and molded. So we can find that his great striving to overcome the difficulties of life, his striving going on from a feeling of inferiority and leading towards the goal of superiority, is always combined with a certain individual degree of social interest. We find in each expression, in each movement of each individual, how he has used his training for social interest, and so when he meets later in life the problems which can be solved rightly only if they are really solved in a great social feeling, then it will be decided if he is adjusted rightly or not. So we find at last that all the failures in life, problem children, neurotic and psychotic persons, delinquents, suicides, drunkards, and so on, are always lacking social interest. And it is not only this interest, but in the same way they are also lacking courage, understanding, and the right training for the solution of the social problems.
So again, I think it's just good to like see these folks, hear them in their own words, see how they portrayed themselves, and see sort of what happened. So the next person we're going to talk about is Erik Erikson. And so he was alive from 1902 to 1994. So I was like 12 when he died. So again, giving you context of how recently some of these folks lived. He was trained by Anna Freud. So he was sort of I don't know, sometimes we talk about intellectual, like children or grandchildren. So he was sort of like Freud's intellectual grand person. I don't know, it sounds weird out of context. And he is the one that, if you remember when we were looking at that chart of Freud's different psychosexual stages, that he, is the one who came up with the crises at each one that needed to be resolved. And what I really like about Erikson as well is that he went beyond just puberty. He said, no, we keep growing and developing throughout our lives. So we need to think about lifespan development. And so he has these stages of psychosocial development. Again, notice it's psychosocial, no longer psychosexual, right? And each stage for Erikson identifies a crisis. And the more successfully you resolve each crisis, the better adjusted you will be. So the first one for Erikson is trust versus mistrust. That first year of life, will your caretakers be reliable? If you cry, will they come, right? But will they not be maybe overindulgent? Then from 1 to 2 years, you have autonomy versus shame and doubt. Your child is starting to learn to explore the world. So it's really bad if the parent is too smothering or is completely neglectful. So, the kid starts to explore, let's say you're outside having a picnic, and the kid starts to like wander off to look at stuff, right? You don't want a parent that like doesn't let them go outside the blanket, right? But you also don't want a parent that like lets them wander into the street, right? I mean, that's an extreme example. But essentially you want a parent that will let them explore, but also still keep a watchful eye. Age 3 to 5 years, you have initiative versus guilt. So again, if we are tracking this, should have said this was the oral stage, the anal stage. It's kind of like overlaps with the anal stage and the Oedipal phase, more with the Oedipal phase. And so the idea here for Erikson is, can the child plan things or do things on their own, like dress themselves? If they're made to feel guilty about making their own choices, they won't function well. However, Erikson does have a positive outlook on this stage, saying that most guilt is quickly compensated for by a sense of accomplishment. So kids are pretty resilient, essentially, is what he was saying. The example I always use for this, I'm realizing now, is like so out of date. When I first moved here, one of my colleagues, her son, who's now in high school, but he was in the States, and his thing was he liked to have 2 different socks on when he got dressed. Like they could not match. That was a problem. But she just rolled with it, and she was like, it's great. I don't have to try to match socks. I just throw them all in the drawer, right? One less thing for me to do. If she had been like, no, that's stupid, you have to always wear matching socks, right? That might have affected his development in different ways. We also then see what would have been called the latent stage competence, or industry versus inferiority. And so this is when kids start kindergarten, 1st grade, in that phase, and they start to compare their self-worth to other kids, like in the classroom. Is Johnny better than me at math? Is Susie better than me at science, right? And then also outside of the classroom, can Sally run faster than I can? Can Bobby do, I don't know, hopscotch? I'm trying to think of like kid games, right? Better than I can. And so you start to recognize disparities in your personal abilities relative to the other children. And again, Erikson said this is really like a bad thing. This is just like how you learn and essentially how you better yourself. And then you have at the genital phase, the identity versus role confusion. So this is your teen years into your 20s, and this is really when he starts diverging from Freud. If you remember at the genital phase, Freud said the big task is like start dating, find that person you're gonna be with, and like maybe also like work, right? So he really focused in on so the romantic side of this. And Erikson said, no, the most important thing here in the teen years and into the 20s, so again, where most of you in this room probably are, is questioning the self, identity versus role confusion. Who am I? How do I fit in? What do I want to be when I grow up? What college do I want to go to? Do I want to go to college? What's my major going to be? Do I want to change my major? Right? All of these various questions that you ask yourself over and over and over. And he had ideas about sort of like how you navigated that and whether that would impact you going on. He also said then the 20s to the early 40s, that's when people start really focusing on relationships. And interestingly, like this is a very like modern conceptualization of it, right? I don't know that even when Erikson was like initially writing that was the case, right? I was talking about this with someone fairly recently. Like my grandparents, I think, got married when they were 18, right? Like they were married for 70 years before my grandmother passed. They had my dad when my grandfather was 20 and my grandmother was 21, right? And that used to be like really, really common. And so the idea of like, no, you don't actually like start even thinking about marriage, really getting settled with someone until after you sort of establish this, your college and whatnot. Again, very modern, right? I didn't get married until I was 26 or 27, somewhere in that range. Right. And that was pretty common. Like I went to a lot of weddings when I was in grad school because a lot of people were getting married around that age, right? So again, I just think it's sort of forward thinking and I'm impressed with it. Who do I want to date? Do I want to date anybody? Right? What am I going to do with my life? Do I want kids? Do I not want kids? Right? Do I want to be tied down to someone or do I want an open relationship? Things along those lines. And then you get into sort of midlife. You have generativity versus stagnation. This is your 40s to your 60s. And this is where Erikson would have talked about the midlife crisis. So the idea of you look at your accomplishments, maybe your failures, right? Am I satisfied with my life or not, right? There's a possibility of a feeling of stagnation here, a feeling like I haven't actually done anything with my life. I haven't done anything to help the next generation. Now, really interestingly, modern research is a little conflictual about whether a midlife crisis even exists, right? I mean, certainly it's a thing for some people, right? Like, shouldn't call him out for this. My father literally bought a sports car, right? Like it was very cliche, right? He has since sold it and it's good, right? But there are people who go through a crisis at this point, but there are plenty of people who don't, who just sort of navigate through. And I think what Erikson would argue is like they don't need to go through the crisis because they are experiencing generativity, right? And then he even had a phase from your sort of late 60s and up to what we would call older adults. And he called this integrity versus despair. So people at this point, typically, multiple things will still happen in American society if people are able to retire, right? And some handle it very gracefully. They love that they can kind of step out of the working world role. But some can become very bitter and unhappy, dissatisfied with what they've accomplished or failed to accomplish within their life. So they might reflect on the past and either conclude with satisfaction or despair. And there's also, I think, an element here of feeling whether like your life is actually done or not, right? There are unfortunately folks who like get to this space and they hit despair. And so even though they could retire financially, they don't, right? We've had professors here who teach into their 80s. That's not going to be me. We are working with a financial planner. We are aiming for age 65 so that we could enjoy our life after working, right? And then there have been professors who have done really well. So one of my mentors, Sharon Payne, who used to be in the social work department here, she like her thing was she wanted to travel, and she was literally on like the first tour group that went to Cuba, before, like when it reopened, essentially. And like, that's what she wanted to do with her life, and she's now like moved to Florida, and it's like, good for you, you know, like do what you want to do. Alrighty, so now we have a clip of Erikson. That was some fair use notice.
One of the most valuable concepts emerging from psychological research is that of lifespan development. The idea that many aspects of human nature continue to develop throughout the entire life cycle. As we come to the end of our life, for example, there's what we call biological senescing, growing older physically, but also the possibility of psychological adolescing and developing psychologically to our full potential. Erik Erikson helped redirect developmental psychology toward the entire life cycle. His insights into the crises of identity came out of his own experiences as a newcomer to the United States.
Because as an immigrant, I faced one of those very important redefinitions that a man has to make who lost his language, all the references on the basis of which his sensory and sensual impressions were based. When I came to Boston in 1933, psychoanalysis, that was quite a new field.
Freud presented a very, very important model of psychosexual development, pointing out that we have to understand a good deal of man's later life in view of the way he was able to resolve conflicts in his very early life. And it certainly seems that Freud did not pay an awful lot of attention beyond these first 5 years of life. Certainly it seems that you try to conceptualize these later periods as well as these earlier periods in somewhat more detail. But you have added what seems to be some character dimensions that you think evolve eventually from this early level. You talk about basic trust versus basic mistrust being related to this oral sensory level.
Remember here that this is not just a matter of a simple shift of focus, that one is built on the other. Now, you undoubtedly remember that what Freud first was very much concerned with was to find the experiences in life in which he could find quantities of something. So to him, the origins and the transformations of sexual energy was not a matter of preoccupation with sexuality, but it seemed to him the most likely area in which you could find quantities which arise out of the body chemistry and are translated into drives. And the main point is that we later on were concerned not just with the question of what does orality contribute to sexuality. What we were interested in is what orality may contribute to the child's psychosocial development. In other words, the orality takes place in relationship to the mother who feeds and who reassures and who cuddles and keeps warm. What you learn first in life is to take in. But as you take in, and take in with your mouth, with your eyes, with your senses. So what seemed important was what contribution is that to psychosocial education. And there I felt that the first basic psychosocial attitude to be learned is that you can trust your mother, that she will come back and feed you. But mistrust is just as important. Mistrust is the ratio of trust and mistrust is our basic social attitude. We do this constantly. If we walk, if we enter somewhere, we have to differentiate now. Can we trust or mistrust? And mistrust meaning the recognition of danger, the anticipation of discomfort, and so on. So these are two things, is very basic to the whole scheme.
Building on the foundation of Freud, you've introduced the important dimension of social development, as you call it, psychosocial development. It's filling in a little bit of a gap in Freud's work in the sense that he did not really develop this.
Erikson identified 8 stages of psychosocial development, from birth to late adulthood, in which the individual is challenged by specific crises or conflicts. Each stage is defined by a developmental task. The individual must come to terms with 2 opposite demands, balancing or integrating them. For the young adult, the conflict is between isolation and intimacy, the ability to make a full commitment to another person. This requires accepting responsibilities and giving up some privacy and independence. Failure to resolve this developmental crisis can lead to isolation, to a lack of meaningful psychological connections with other people. Research indicates that anything which isolates us from sources of social support can leave us at risk for a number of physical and mental problems. The next crisis and opportunity for growth comes during the 30s and 40s. During midlife, people usually move beyond the focus on self to wider commitments to family, work, and society. But for those who haven't resolved the earlier crises of identity and intimacy, there may loom ahead what's known as the midlife crisis. People in a midlife crisis are self-indulgent. They want to give up their commitments
there's
for
no
one
more
last fling.
Erickson clips, so since I just said everything this guy's saying, we'll stop there. I believe my
Thing.
next slide will start us on Horneye. Yeah, so we will save that for Friday because Horneye is a lot of what she is. A good a lot. I like Horneye, but she needs a little bit more detail. So I will see you all Friday to talk about Karen Horneye.